Thor the Dark World. Upon first viewing of this film, I remember thinking that, yeah, it was okay, and that was pretty much it. In comparison to the other MCU movie released in 2013, Iron Man 3, I mean, there really is none. In my opinion, Iron Man 3 is far superior. But going back and revisiting this film, I was curious to see if my thoughts had changed at all. Especially considering all of the MCU projects that have come after it. I mean, some people consider this movie downright terrible. But before we get into it, like, subscribe, comment, and tell a friend if you like my content, or don't, your choice. Alright, let's dive into Thor the Dark World. I feel like this movie had so much potential during pre-production. They brought on Alan Taylor to helm the project, well known for orchestrating successful television series with ensemble casts like The West Wing, The Sopranos, Mad Men, and even Game of Thrones. Hemsworth was back, Portman was back, Hopkins, Hiddleston, the cast that led to the success of the original film all returned. They even added Christopher Eccleston as the principal villain, who at the time wasn't very well known in the States, but who had already established himself in the UK, starring as Major West, the despicable leader of renegade soldiers in 28 Days Later, as well as securing the role as the Ninth Doctor in the beloved British sci-fi series Doctor Who. He was a very, very talented actor, and still is. I didn't realize until my rewatch either that two of the screenwriters behind Dark World were Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus, the same two writers who penned Infinity War and Endgame. So what the hell happened? Listen, I don't consider this movie bad. I know it often gets ranked toward the very bottom of critics' MCU rankings, and that's very true, but there are a lot of well-done movies and shows in this franchise. So some of these products have to land somewhere that nobody wants them to. But I don't think this movie is exceptional either. It's very, very average. Honestly, pretty disappointing compared to the first movie. The story, the villain, the action, I don't think any of it stacks up against the first one. It's definitely a step backward. I mean, how bland is this villain? Loki is a superstar in the franchise and one of the best villains in the series, and after leaving his mark all over Thor and the Avengers, we're left with Malekith in the Dark World. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with Malekith in the comics, but I'm told he's a pretty beloved Thor villain and a formidable one at that. The version of this villain portrayed in the Dark World is just so nothing. We're greeted with another brief backstory narrated by Odin, explaining the Dark Elves, Malekith, and the Aether, but it doesn't really explain anything. We learn the Aether is a weapon, we learn the Dark Elves are a race of people that inhabit one of the 9 realms, and we learn absolutely nothing about Malekith's motives or why he wants to revert the universe to darkness. And in fact, we never learn. His sole goal in this movie is to utilize the Aether during the conversion of the 9 realms to convert the entire universe to darkness. Why? Because the elves prefer that? They already have their own dark world, hence the title. Do they have any prior grudges against Asgard beside the plot involving the Aether? We don't know. Does Malekith have some tragic backstory compelling him towards his mission? Nobody knows. He's just so one-dimensional and boring. Not to mention, they don't let Christopher Eccleston do anything with this character. He has zero personality, just a bad dude doing bad stuff just because. And that's all well and good if there's at least an engaging persona to back it up, but there isn't. He's just so dull. He isn't even very involved in the action either. The vast majority of this film, Thor and his allies battle it out with his right-hand man, Curse, and their dark elf cronies. This character, the way he's written, just does not work at all. And because so much of the story revolves around Malekith and his objective of acquiring the Aether, it just falls so flat. Then Jane gets possessed by the Aether, so it gives the story reason to bring her back. It's all just so uninteresting. To the point where when Frigga sacrifices herself protecting Jane, you're left emotionless, knowing very well that you probably should feel something. So hopefully the action makes up for the lifeless story. Yeah, sometimes. A lot of the action in this movie is as dreary as the story. There are a few really fun sequences though. When Thor and Loki take on Curse and the Dark Elves on their home planet, it is a lot of fun. We finally get to see Thor and Loki work together and utilize Loki's tricks. The manner in which the portals are used in the climax is also pretty unique. We get to see this fight transcend multiple realms as the hero and villain get tossed around like ragdolls. It adds another fascinating layer to this otherwise normal sequence. That being said, toward the end of the climax, when Thor takes on Malekith mano a mano, it loses its luster. They don't even scrap it out. Thor uses Eric's magnetic rod things and just starts teleporting Malekith's body parts to different realms, and then Malekith is ultimately killed when his ship collapses on him. It's all so silly and just underwhelming to an otherwise pretty cool scene. I started this retrospective by saying that I don't think this is a bad movie, and I stand by that. There is some good stuff to find in this movie, notably the manner in which it continues to contextualize Thor and Loki's dynamic. Hemsworth and Hiddleston bounce off each other so well. Seeing them finally work together and be actual brothers for once is a refreshing change of pace. You get to see sides of Loki that aren't normally apparent. I also appreciate the way this film structures Odin and Thor's relationship as well, seeing them come to odds similar to how they did in the original, but this time on opposite sides. Odin letting his mournful emotions getting the better of him, willing to commit all of his power to destroying one race of beings in an act of vengeance. Thor, now taking the lessons Odin taught him prior to use all of his influence to stop Malekith without causing any more chaos throughout the 9 realms. It's an intriguing little shift in each character's moral stance. Another aspect of this film I feel as though I didn't fully appreciate upon its release were the visuals. The Dark World honestly has some pretty cool visuals that I never noticed before, probably because a lot of this movie is so uninspired. I think the Dark Elf ships and how they move is really cool. Asgard looks fantastic. Honestly, I think it looks better than it did in the original. It's still as regal, but it also has this touch of normalcy to it, and more of a down-to-earth Nordic appearance, more so than the first ever had. Even the Dark Elves' home planet, although barren and drab, is interesting to look at. The way they created an eclipse effects to darken the environment was a cool little touch. This is a feature of this movie that I just don't think gets enough credit. While I still have the same opinion overall for this movie several years later, I do think there are details about it that go unnoticed and unappreciated, like the cast, the visuals, and a few of the action sequences. Now, I did a little research to figure out why this movie failed when the original succeeded, and while Marcus and McFeely, as well as Christopher Yost, are listed as the 3 credited screenwriters, I did find that McFeely admitted that this film was touched by numerous writers all throughout production. Just based on that statement, my intuition tells me that the reason this movie didn't live up to the highs of the first was probably due to too many cooks in the kitchen. It's disappointing because they did everything right in the planning phase of this film. Brought back an adored cast, signed on a capable director, added a well-respected and talented actor as Thor's foil, but it just seems like this is one of those MCU films that suffered from a lack of one individual vision and just too many changes mid-production. The one silver lining I pulled out of this was that it's good to go back and remember when there were definitely some low points early on in the MCU, and it isn't just a recent trend. Hopefully that's a sign of better things to come.